Now, another very sensitive area is what they call state terrorism. It is a very controversially discussed form of terrorism which describes terrorist acts of a government to pursue its internal or external goals. It comprises the terrorist acts of a state to intimidate its own population or parts of it. Some authors say that terrorism only applies to individual groups and not to governments, as the use of force by a government is already regulated by international law. I'm now citing the old Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, from March 2005. I doubt this very much, as in the past we had no problems defining the atrocious acts of the German Nazi regime, the regime we had until 1945 in Germany and inside the German borders, as terrorism. No one doubts that that was terrorism. Still, I don't want to go into details of that academic discussion. For me, it's very academic because it has no real impact on the law or on law enforcement. But there is a very special form of state terrorism which I should not miss out to talk about, the state-sponsored terrorism, which is directed against goals abroad. Certainly, it is terrorism that has to be handled by law enforcement. Unfortunately, there are many examples of state-sponsored terrorism all over the world. The destruction of the Pan Am 747 flight over Lockerbie in Scotland on December 21st in 1988 being one of the most dramatic ones in new history. It took until 2003, and not because of the evidence produced in the trial, ending with a verdict in 2001 and later an appeal verdict in 2002, the Libyan government confessed its responsibility for this crime. It was not because of this ongoing ending trial, it was because of the political pressure put upon them, which merely giving them a terrorist status did not enable them to use their funds at international banks worldwide and to go on with international economics. So the pressure of the international community helped to get Libya on the light side of the law again. A very unique example is the Rainbow Warrior case. I mention this because I don't want to leave out any countries which are friends and allies of my own country. The Rainbow Warrior was the flagship of the environmental organization Greenpeace that harbored on July 85 in Auckland, New Zealand. It was bound to protest against French nuclear bomb tests in the Mururoa atoll. 2 French military officers sank it by explosives, thus killing a Portuguese photographer being on board. An act of terrorism. Killing a civilian, politically motivated. The perpetrators were identified. I always admire my New Zealand colleagues, they're now retired too, when they spoke about that case of how they identified the perpetrators. They were arrested and tried. Unfortunately, I really mean it unfortunately, they did not serve their whole 10-year sentence, but were delivered to France to be set free. Terrorism? So, or is it just sabotage, as the French try to describe it? No, for me it's terrorism. The threat by terrorism is the greatest challenge for all security and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Unfortunately, it is unlikely to change in the near future. International terrorism is active and virulent all over the world, in my home country, as in most of the Southeast Asia countries like Indonesia. It is not easy to give a worldwide situation report on terrorism, and I even don't try it. I just cited you an impression from the results of a survey of a German foundation in 2006, published exactly 2 years ago. According to this survey, the yearly number of terrorist attacks in the preceding 5 years, the yearly number, increased from 700 to 2,200 worldwide. The numbers of casualties, dead and injured, increased from 4,000 to 30,000.
Sorry.
It has to be mentioned that this period being researched was exactly a 5 years period after 9/11, after the attack on the World Trade Center on the 11th of September 2001. Terrorists attack our democracies with all means available. Although terrorists act inhumanly, the only guideline, and this is now for me very important to tell it to you, for the police and the justice system can only be the rule of law. It is the task of police and justice to protect the constitutional democracy, the rights of our constitutions, and the human rights, thus guaranteeing the rule of law. This leads me to a statement which in some countries is still very controversial discussed. Terrorism is a crime that has to be investigated by law enforcement with the tools provided by the law. And this means in detail. Without any exception, the rule of law is always absolutely applicable. Terrorists have to be identified, evidence has to be gathered, and the perpetrators have to be brought to justice.